My ex-husband said this camera disappeared 2 years ago. So why was it sitting outside my door tonight? Claire Bennett whispered the words to herself as rainwater slid down the apartment window behind her. Portland was quiet after 11 at night, the kind of cold silence that made every passing car sound distant and lonely. She stood barefoot near the doorway of her small second-floor apartment, staring at the black Nikon camera resting on the welcome mat like something carefully returned after years of being forgotten. The hallway light above her flickered softly. For a moment she did not move. She only listened. Rain tapping metal railings. Wind moving through wet cedar trees outside the building. Her own breathing. Then she crouched slowly beside the camera. The strap was still wrapped with faded dark blue thread from an old wedding shoot she had photographed years ago. Her fingers froze the second she touched it. She remembered tying that thread herself. Daniel had told her the camera was gone forever. Lost during a business trip. Probably stolen, he had said casually while checking emails on his phone without even looking at her face. At the time, she had cried harder over the camera than the marriage itself. Because the camera held everything. Thousands of photographs. Road trips along the Oregon coast. Early clients. Late sunsets. The final Christmas before the divorce. Pieces of her life Daniel always called unimportant. Claire swallowed carefully and lifted the camera into her hands. Cold rainwater dripped from the lens. "No," she whispered under her breath. "This cannot be real." She stepped back inside her apartment and locked the door twice. The room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lavender detergent. A small editing desk sat near the window beside stacks of untouched photography magazines. Her life had become smaller after the divorce. Quieter. Safe in a way that felt more like hiding than healing. She placed the Nikon gently on the kitchen counter beneath the warm yellow light. The screen was dark. Dead, she assumed. Of course it was dead. 2 years missing in some forgotten storage box or hotel closet somewhere in Seattle. But when her thumb accidentally brushed the power button, the screen blinked on instantly. Claire felt her stomach tighten. The battery icon showed nearly full charge. Her eyes narrowed. That is impossible. She stared at the glowing screen while rain continued sliding down the glass behind her. A strange feeling crept slowly through her chest. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Something quieter. She sat down carefully at the counter and turned the camera over in her hands. The body carried small scratches she recognized immediately. One near the shutter button from a wedding in Salem. Another along the side from a hiking trip near Mount Hood with Daniel years ago. Back when he still smiled in photographs instead of avoiding them. Claire hesitated before opening the image gallery. Hundreds of old thumbnails appeared across the screen. Familiar faces. Brides laughing under white lights. Couples dancing in barns and gardens across Oregon. Tiny frozen pieces of a life she no longer recognized. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Then she noticed something strange. The final image in the gallery was dated 3 weeks ago. Claire blinked once. Then again. Her fingers tightened around the camera. 3 weeks ago. Her breathing slowed instantly. "No," she whispered. "No, that cannot be right." She tapped the image open. Dark hallway. Apartment lighting. Slight motion blur. It did not look familiar. She checked the timestamp again carefully. Seattle, Washington. 3 weeks earlier at 11:42 p.m. Claire sat completely still. Rain tapped harder against the windows now. Somewhere outside, a train horn echoed faintly through the city. Her pulse began climbing slowly inside her chest. Daniel lived in Seattle now. Daniel had taken this camera. Daniel had lied about losing it. Claire leaned closer to the glowing screen as if the image itself might suddenly explain everything. Instead, she noticed something else. In the corner of the photograph, reflected faintly in a glass door, stood the outline of a woman wearing a pale coat. Claire stopped breathing for a second. She knew that coat. That photo was taken 3 weeks ago, but I have not touched this camera since the divorce. Claire's voice sounded small against the steady rain outside her apartment windows. Midnight had passed without her noticing. The kitchen clock glowed 12:43 a.m. in soft green numbers, while the city beyond the glass faded into wet shadows and distant headlights. She sat motionless at the counter, staring at the Nikon screen in her trembling hands. The photograph remained frozen before her eyes. Dark apartment hallway. Pale yellow overhead light. Reflection in glass. And that coat. Her coat. The same ivory wool coat she had lost during the final winter of her marriage to Daniel Harper. Claire swallowed hard and zoomed in again. Pixel by pixel, the reflection sharpened slightly. The woman's face remained distorted by rain and glass, but the coat was unmistakable. She remembered buying it during a weekend trip to Cannon Beach 6 years earlier. Daniel had complained about the price the entire drive home. "You already own 3 coats," he had said without looking up from his phone. At the time, she thought it was an ordinary argument between exhausted spouses. Now the memory felt different somehow. Colder. Claire leaned closer to the screen as if the photograph itself might suddenly explain why her pulse would not slow down. She opened the metadata panel. Date. Time. Location. Seattle, Washington. 3 weeks earlier. Her stomach tightened immediately. Daniel lived in Seattle now. Daniel had been the one who claimed the camera disappeared forever after a real estate conference in San Francisco nearly 2 years ago. Daniel had watched her cry over losing it. She remembered that night perfectly. She had searched their old house until nearly sunrise while he stood in the doorway of their bedroom looking annoyed instead of concerned. "Claire," he had sighed heavily back then. "It is just a camera. Just a camera." The words still stung. Outside, thunder rolled softly over Portland. Rainwater slid down the windows beside stacks of unopened client invoices and photography equipment she barely used anymore. Her freelance work had slowed over the past year. Weddings, engagement shoots, small birthday events. Enough to survive. Not enough to feel secure. After the divorce, Claire had stopped photographing people the way she once did. She no longer chased laughter or spontaneous moments. Somewhere along the way, she stopped trusting smiles. Her finger hovered above the image gallery again. She scrolled backward slowly through dozens of unfamiliar photographs. Hallways, parking garages, coffee shops, apartment buildings. Most were dark and slightly blurry, as though someone had taken them quickly while walking. Then another image appeared. Claire froze. It showed the same hallway from a different angle. A silver elevator door. Framed artwork. And in the corner of the reflection stood Daniel himself. Her breathing caught immediately. He wore a charcoal overcoat she recognized from their final anniversary dinner before the divorce. He looked thinner now. Sharper somehow. Older around the eyes. But it was not Daniel's appearance that unsettled her. It was where he was looking. He was staring directly toward someone standing outside the frame. Someone the camera never captured. Claire felt a chill spread slowly across her arms. "Why would you take these?" she whispered softly. Rain hammered harder against the building now. Somewhere upstairs, footsteps crossed an apartment floor. Pipes rattled faintly inside the walls. The ordinary sounds of the night suddenly felt strange around her. Like the entire room had shifted slightly out of place. Claire enlarged the reflection again until the image became grainy and distorted. Then she saw it. A number beside the elevator. For C. Her chest tightened instantly. She knew that number. Daniel had once rented a temporary apartment during a 6-month project in Seattle while they were still married. At least that was the story he gave her. Back then she never questioned it. She trusted him completely. Too completely. Claire stood abruptly from the counter and crossed toward her desk near the living room window. Her old laptop hummed softly to life beneath scattered memory cards and editing notes. She opened old calendars, archived invoices, forgotten email threads. Outside, rain blurred the neon lights of a 24-hour diner across the street. The deeper she searched, the quieter the apartment became. Her eyes scanned dates carefully. Wedding bookings, hotel receipts, Daniel's business trips. Then her fingers stopped moving. The timeline matched perfectly. Every photograph from Seattle aligned with weekends Daniel claimed he was attending investor meetings. Claire stared silently at the glowing screen while cold unease settled heavily inside her chest. Then her phone vibrated suddenly across the desk. She jumped hard enough to nearly drop the camera. Unknown number. Seattle area code. Claire hesitated before answering. For several seconds only silence breathed softly through the speaker. Then a woman's voice whispered quietly into the darkness. "You found the camera, did not you?" The line disconnected immediately. Claire did not sleep after the call. She remained seated beside the rain-covered window until dawn slowly turned the Portland skyline pale gray. The unknown woman's voice kept replaying in her mind with quiet precision. You found the camera, did not you? Not fear. Not surprise. The woman had sounded almost resigned, like someone who had been waiting for this moment longer than Claire realized. By 7 in the morning, the rain softened into a cold mist drifting through downtown streets below her apartment. Coffee shops opened one by one beneath glowing signs while commuters hurried through puddles carrying umbrellas and paper cups. The city moved normally. Claire did not. She sat inside her small photography studio across town, surrounded by framed wedding portraits she no longer liked looking at. Couples smiling beneath fairy lights. Hands intertwined. Carefully edited happiness. The studio smelled faintly of printer ink and old wood flooring warmed by weak radiator heat. She placed the Nikon camera carefully beside her editing monitor and stared at it in silence. Daniel always said photography was just a phase, until it became the thing that exposed him. The words escaped quietly before she realized she had spoken aloud. Across the room, her assistant Jenna looked up from packaging photo orders. Jenna Morales was 26, energetic, endlessly curious, and too emotionally honest to hide concern. You okay? She asked carefully. Claire forced a small nod. Just tired. Jenna hesitated but did not push further. That was one thing Claire appreciated about her. She knew when silence mattered more than questions. Outside, wind brushed lightly against the studio windows while cloudy daylight stretched across rows of untouched camera equipment. Claire leaned back slowly in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The memories came immediately. 6 years earlier. Seattle. Winter rain sliding across the restaurant windows during Daniel's company holiday party. She remembered the warmth of candlelight against polished glass tables. The sound of expensive laughter. Daniel standing near investors in a charcoal suit, while she adjusted camera settings beside her untouched wine glass. Back then, she still believed they were building something together. Claire, not now, Daniel had whispered sharply that night when she tried showing him photographs from a wedding shoot she was proud of. People are trying to have real conversations. Real conversations. Real careers. Real ambitions. Daniel always spoke about her photography like it was a childish habit she would eventually outgrow. In public, he smiled politely about it. In private, he dismantled it piece by piece until she almost believed him. Claire opened her eyes again and reached toward a nearby storage shelf. Her fingers brushed against an old leather wedding album, hidden beneath stacked invoices. She pulled it down slowly and carried it toward the desk beneath the soft yellow editing lamp. H3.3 settled around her quietly now. Claire sat alone in the dim studio, flipping through old wedding albums beneath the pale amber light while rainwater streaked softly down the windows behind her. Each page felt heavier than the last. Daniel smiling beside her at their own reception beneath hanging Edison lights. Daniel holding champagne while guests applauded. Daniel resting his hand gently at the small of her back as though he had loved her completely. Claire stared at one photograph longer than the others. She had taken it herself using a time shutter during their honeymoon near Cannon Beach. Daniel stood on wet sand facing the Pacific Ocean while morning fog rolled over dark waves behind him. He looked younger then, softer around the eyes, less guarded. Or maybe she had simply never known where to look. A knock at the studio door startled her from the memory. Jenna stepped inside carefully carrying 2 coffees from the cafe downstairs. You have been staring at those albums for an hour, she said gently. That usually means something bad. Claire accepted the coffee but did not drink it. Do you ever feel like you missed something obvious? Jenna frowned slightly. About what? Claire glanced toward the Nikon camera resting beside the monitor. About someone. The younger woman followed her gaze toward the camera. Is that the one your ex supposedly lost? Claire nodded slowly. Jenna's expression shifted immediately. Wait, that thing actually showed up. Claire hesitated before answering. Last night. That is creepy. The word hung softly in the room. Creepy. Not dangerous. Not criminal. Just wrong in a quiet, impossible way. Claire looked back down at the wedding album spread open beneath her fingertips. Her eyes drifted toward one specific image from Daniel's final company gala before the divorce. Hundreds of guests. Ballroom lights. Investors. champagne towers. Then her breath caught slightly. In the far corner of the photograph stood the same maintenance worker uniform she had seen reflected inside the recent Seattle images from the camera. Claire sat completely still. The photograph was 6 years old. Claire stared at the photograph so long that the coffee beside her turned cold. Outside the studio windows, Portland drifted into late afternoon beneath low silver clouds and steady wind. Cars sprayed rainwater across narrow streets while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas without looking at one another. Inside the studio, the air felt strangely still. Jenna had already gone home, leaving behind only the faint smell of espresso and printer paper. Claire remained alone beneath the warm amber glow of her editing lamp, the old gala photograph spread open beside the Nikon camera. Her pulse had not settled since noticing the maintenance uniform in the background. 6 years earlier. The same dark gray shirt. The same building logo stitched above the chest pocket. The same man. Slowly, Claire reached for the camera again and reopened the Seattle hallway images. Her fingers moved carefully now, almost reverently, like someone handling evidence instead of memories. She enlarged the reflection in the glass door once more. Daniel stood partially visible beneath fluorescent hallway lighting, one hand in his coat pocket while speaking to the maintenance worker. But this time Claire noticed something she had missed before. The expression on Daniel's face. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. Controlled. Intentional. The strangest part was not the man in the photo. It was the way Daniel looked at him. Claire whispered the words softly into the empty studio. She knew Daniel's expressions better than anyone once. Or at least she thought she had. She knew his networking smile. His impatient smile. His performative smile for investors and charity events. But this expression felt unfamiliar. Daniel looked cautious. Almost nervous. Claire leaned closer to the screen while rain tapped steadily against the glass outside. In the reflection, the maintenance worker held a large gray envelope tucked carefully beneath one arm. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on it. Not casually. Intently. Like whatever sat inside that envelope mattered more than the conversation itself. Claire felt tension tighten slowly through her shoulders. Why would Daniel meet privately with a building maintenance employee in the middle of the night? Why photograph it? Why keep these images hidden inside her missing camera for years? Her mind searched desperately for ordinary explanations. Business documents. Property records. Construction plans. But deep down, none of those explanations matched the atmosphere living inside the photographs. The images felt secretive in a deeply personal way. Claire enlarged the reflection again until the pixels blurred harshly across the screen. The hallway lights distorted into grainy streaks. Daniel's face nearly disappeared beneath digital noise. Still, something about the body language remained unmistakable. Distance. Calculation. Caution. Claire stopped breathing for a moment. Then she quickly grabbed her phone and photographed the laptop screen before the image shifted again. H4.3 unfolded almost instinctively now. She captured multiple angles of the reflection while her hands trembled slightly beneath the yellow desk lamp. One photograph. Then another. Then closer. She needed proof that she was not imagining this. Needed something solid to anchor the growing unease inside her chest. The studio suddenly felt too quiet. Too enclosed. Claire stood and crossed toward the front windows overlooking the wet Portland street below. Wind rattled lightly against the glass. Neon signs flickered across puddles outside a nearby diner, while buses hissed through rain-soaked intersections. Ordinary life continued peacefully beneath the storm. But inside her mind, old memories had started rearranging themselves into something unfamiliar. She remembered Seattle business trips Daniel used to take during the final years of their marriage. The last-minute schedule changes. The private calls he took on hotel balconies. The growing irritation whenever she asked simple questions. At the time she blamed stress. Ambition. Pressure. Daniel always framed himself as a man carrying impossible responsibilities. And Claire had believed him because loving someone often meant explaining away the things that hurt you. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. Claire flinched hard enough to nearly drop it. Unknown number again. Seattle area code. She stared at the screen without answering immediately. The rain outside intensified, blurring the city lights into watercolor streaks across the windows. Finally, she pressed accept and lifted the phone carefully to her ear. Silence greeted her again at first. Then faint background noise. Traffic. A passing train. Someone breathing softly. Claire spoke first this time. Who are you? For several seconds the caller said nothing. Then the same woman from the previous night answered quietly. You need to stop looking at the reflections. Claire's stomach tightened instantly. What does that mean? Another pause. Longer this time. Heavy somehow. Then the woman whispered something that made every muscle in Claire's body go still. Because the reflections are not the most important part of those photographs. The line disconnected immediately. Claire barely slept after the second phone call. By early morning, Portland had disappeared beneath heavy fog and cold spring rain. The city looked washed pale through the apartment windows while distant traffic hummed softly beneath gray skies. She stood in her kitchen holding untouched coffee, replaying the woman's warning over and over in her head. The reflections are not the most important part of those photographs. If not the reflections, then what? Her eyes drifted back toward the Nikon camera resting on the counter beside scattered notes and printed screenshots. Something inside her refused to let this go anymore. It was no longer curiosity. It was the slow, terrifying feeling that pieces of her marriage had existed in places she never saw. By 10 that morning, Claire returned to her photography studio downtown. The air smelled of wet pavement and roasted coffee drifting in from the cafe downstairs. Jenna arrived shortly after carrying a paper bag of pastries, and immediately noticed the dark circles beneath Claire's eyes. You look like you spent the night solving a murder mystery, she joked softly before stopping when Claire did not smile. The younger woman set the pastries down carefully. Okay. That bad? Claire hesitated. Then she turned the laptop screen toward her assistant and showed her the enlarged hallway image from Seattle. Jenna leaned closer immediately. Apartment 4C? She asked. Claire nodded slowly. I knew that hallway. I just never realized he had been there while we were still married. Saying it aloud made her stomach tighten again. Jenna frowned while studying the image. You think he lied about those business trips? Claire gave a quiet, bitter laugh without humor. I think I stopped knowing what was true a long time ago. Outside the studio windows, rain tapped steadily against the glass while delivery trucks rolled through puddles below. Claire reopened old digital calendars and archived photography bookings from 6 years earlier. H5.3 unfolded quietly across the studio as she sat beneath the soft editing lights, comparing timelines one by one with growing unease. Hotel confirmations, wedding contracts, gas receipts, Daniel's investor conferences. Every date began aligning with the Seattle photographs, hidden inside the camera. The deeper she searched, the more her chest tightened. Daniel had not simply visited Seattle occasionally. He had been there constantly during the final years of their marriage. Weekends, overnight trips, last-minute flights he always blamed on urgent meetings. Claire remembered how often he returned distant and distracted afterward, carrying expensive cologne and exhaustion she mistook for overwork. Back then she believed marriage meant trusting explanations even when they left bruises you could not describe. Jenna pulled a chair beside her. Claire, maybe you should stop doing this alone. I tried doing it together, Claire answered quietly without looking away from the screen. That was the problem. The room fell silent except for rain and keyboard clicks. Then Claire froze suddenly. One specific date flashed across her monitor. November 12th. 6 years earlier. She recognized it instantly because it was their anniversary weekend. Daniel had told her he needed to stay overnight in Seattle for a luxury property deal. Claire remembered crying quietly in their kitchen afterward because he forgot to call until nearly midnight. Slowly, she opened the corresponding image folder from the camera. Her pulse climbed immediately. There it was. The same hallway. Apartment 4C. Time-stamped 11:37 p.m. on their anniversary night. Claire felt something hollow open slowly inside her chest. Not shock anymore. Recognition. The painful realization that some betrayals begin long before the moment you finally see them clearly. Jenna studied her expression carefully. What? Claire swallowed hard and rotated the laptop screen toward her assistant. He was there that night. Jenna looked confused. What night? Claire's voice became barely audible. Our anniversary. Rain hammered harder against the windows now while downtown Portland disappeared beneath darkening clouds. For several seconds neither woman spoke. Then Jenna noticed something Claire had missed. Wait. She leaned closer toward the image. What is that? Claire narrowed her eyes. Near the bottom corner of the hallway photograph sat a luggage cart partially hidden beside the elevator doors. Attached to one suitcase was a white hotel tag. Claire zoomed in slowly until the image blurred around the edges. But the printed letters remained visible enough to read. Harborview Suites, Seattle. Claire stopped breathing. Harborview Suites was not an apartment complex. It was a hotel. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Then why does every photo say apartment 4C? She whispered. Before Jenna could answer, Claire's phone vibrated sharply across the desk again. Unknown number. Seattle area code. The same caller. This time when Claire answered, the woman did not whisper. Her voice sounded urgent for the first time. You need to leave Portland before Daniel realizes you still have the camera. Claire held the phone tightly against her ear long after the call disconnected. Rain pounded against the studio windows hard enough to blur downtown Portland into shifting gray shadows. Across the street, headlights reflected across flooded pavement, while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas without noticing the storm building quietly inside her life. Jenna stood frozen beside the desk, watching Claire's face lose color by the second. What did she say? Claire lowered the phone slowly. She said I need to leave Portland before Daniel realizes I still have the camera. Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere downstairs, the cafe grinder hummed faintly beneath the storm outside. Jenna crossed her arms tightly. Okay. That is officially terrifying. Claire wanted to disagree. Wanted to call it paranoia or coincidence or stress. But the woman's voice had not sounded dramatic. It sounded tired. Urgent in the way people sound when they already know how a story ends. By evening the rain had turned colder. Claire returned home carrying the Nikon camera inside her shoulder bag, while wind rattled tree branches against power lines outside her apartment building. The hallway lights flickered softly overhead as she climbed the stairs. Every sound suddenly felt amplified now. Footsteps. Elevator cables. Apartment doors opening somewhere down the corridor. She locked her apartment door twice behind her and immediately checked the windows. Empty street below. Wet sidewalks. No unfamiliar cars. No one watching. Still, unease lingered beneath her skin like static electricity. At 1:12 a.m. exactly, her phone rang again. Seattle area code. Claire's heartbeat stumbled hard inside her chest. H6.1 arrived almost exactly as before, quiet and cold inside the darkness of her apartment. You found the camera, did not you? The woman whispered. Claire stood near the kitchen counter, barefoot against cold hardwood floors while city lights flickered dimly beyond rain-covered windows. Who are you? Claire asked immediately this time. Why are you calling me? The woman hesitated. Claire could hear traffic somewhere behind her. Wind. A passing siren far away. Because I do not think Daniel knows the camera was returned yet, the woman answered quietly. Claire gripped the edge of the counter harder. Returned by who? No answer came immediately. Instead the woman asked softly, have you looked at every photo? Not all of them. Do not do it alone. The line crackled faintly. Claire's pulse climbed higher. What is Daniel involved in? She whispered. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the woman finally answered. I do not think you were ever supposed to see those pictures. The call ended abruptly again. Claire stared at the dark phone screen while rain hammered against the apartment windows. H6.2 unfolded slowly around her now. A mysterious voice from Seattle. Another warning. Another unanswered question. She no longer knew whether the woman was protecting her or frightening her intentionally. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than usual. The warm yellow lighting no longer comforting. Shadows stretched longer across bookshelves and framed photographs. Claire crossed slowly toward the window overlooking the wet Portland street below. H6.3 settled heavily into the night as she stood there for hours afterward, watching rainwater stream down the glass while the city slept around her. She did not turn on music. Did not open the television. She only listened to the storm and replayed every conversation she ever had with Daniel during the final years of their marriage. The lies seemed obvious now in retrospect. Too obvious. But betrayal rarely announces itself clearly while you are living inside it. Sometimes it arrives disguised as exhaustion, as work stress, as distance you explain away because love teaches you to protect the person hurting you. Claire wrapped her sweater tighter around herself and stared down at the empty sidewalk below. Around 3 in the morning, a dark sedan slowed briefly in front of her building before continuing through the intersection. Her stomach tightened instantly. She told herself not to panic. Portland still moved at night. Delivery drivers, rideshare cars, insomniacs searching for coffee. But the unease remained. Her phone buzzed suddenly again. This time it was not the Seattle number. It was Daniel. Claire froze completely. His name glowed softly across the screen while thunder rolled somewhere above the city. Daniel Harper. The first direct contact in nearly 4 months. Her pulse became painfully loud in the silence. The call continued ringing. Claire did not answer. Eventually it stopped. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Claire hesitated before pressing play. Daniel's familiar voice filled the apartment softly, calm and controlled exactly the way she remembered. Hey Claire. Strange question, but have you seen an old camera anywhere recently? I think someone may have dropped it off at the wrong address by mistake. Claire stopped breathing. Then Daniel added one final sentence in a quieter tone that sent cold dread slowly through her entire body. If you did find it, do not look through the files. Claire replayed Daniel's voicemail 4 times before sunrise. Each time his voice sounded calmer than it should have. Too calm for a man asking about a camera he claimed had disappeared 2 years earlier. Outside her apartment, Portland remained trapped beneath cold rain and pale morning fog while traffic crawled slowly through flooded intersections below. Claire stood motionless beside the kitchen counter with the Nikon camera in her hands, staring at it as though it might suddenly explain why every answer only created more questions. If you did find it, do not look through the files. The warning lingered louder in her mind than the rest of his message. Daniel never warned people unless he believed he was losing control of something. By 7 in the morning, Claire had made a decision she could not fully explain even to herself. She packed a small overnight bag, wrapped the camera carefully inside a sweater, and left her apartment before the city fully woke up. Rain dripped steadily from parking garage ceilings while cold winds swept through downtown streets carrying the smell of wet asphalt and coffee. Claire drove north on Interstate 5 beneath heavy gray skies, windshield wipers moving in steady rhythm, as Portland slowly disappeared behind her. Seattle sat nearly 175 miles ahead. She told herself she only needed answers. Nothing more. But deep down she already understood this was no longer about the marriage. Somewhere between the photographs, the phone calls, and Daniel's sudden fear of the camera, something else had been hiding in plain sight for years. Traffic thickened as she crossed into Seattle just after noon. The city skyline rose through layers of mist and low cloud cover, while ferries moved silently across dark water near the harbor. Claire parked outside a small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay and reopened the image metadata on her laptop. H7.1 settled quietly into the moment now. The address in the metadata did not lead to a home. It led to a storage unit. Claire whispered the realization softly while studying the screen. The coordinates attached to multiple photographs pointed not toward Harborview Suites, but toward an industrial block near the waterfront several miles south. A storage facility. Not apartments. Not offices. Storage. Her stomach tightened immediately. The rain had softened into cold drizzle by the time she reached Harbor Point Storage near the old shipping district. Rust-colored warehouses lined the streets while gulls circled overhead beneath dark clouds. The neighborhood felt forgotten compared to the polished downtown towers Daniel usually inhabited. Few people walked outside except delivery workers and dock employees moving through the damp afternoon air. Claire parked across from the facility and sat silently inside her car for nearly a full minute. Her heartbeat sounded too loud inside the enclosed space. She almost turned around twice. Then she remembered Daniel's voicemail. Do not look through the files. That was the moment she realized he was afraid. And Daniel Harper hated being afraid. H7.2 unfolded slowly as Claire crossed the parking lot toward Unit 4C inside the storage complex. A bored middle-aged receptionist named Walter barely looked up from his newspaper behind the front desk when Claire entered the office. The room smelled faintly of dust, coffee and old cardboard. Can I help you? He asked casually. Claire forced calm into her voice. I am looking for someone who rented Unit 4C. Walter frowned immediately. We do not give tenant information. Claire hesitated before showing him one of the hallway photographs from the camera. Please. I just need to know if this place matches. Walter adjusted his reading glasses and studied the image longer than Claire expected. Something shifted subtly in his expression. You a relative? He asked carefully. Ex-wife, Claire answered before she could stop herself. Walter exhaled slowly through his nose and leaned back in his chair. Yeah, he muttered quietly. That looks like our hallway. Claire felt cold spread through her chest. Daniel Harper rented a unit here? Walter glanced toward the security monitors behind him. Lady, I did not say that. But his silence afterward said enough. Minutes later, Claire stood alone outside Unit 4C beneath flickering fluorescent lights while distant rain echoed across the metal roofs overhead. The hallway smelled faintly of salt water and old concrete. H7.3 arrived slowly now as Claire pulled the rolling metal door upward with trembling hands. The storage unit groaned open inch by inch until darkness revealed itself inside. At first, she saw only stacks of cardboard boxes and metal shelving beneath dim overhead lighting. Then her eyes adjusted. Framed photographs covered nearly every wall inside the unit. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Men drinking coffee through cafe windows. Women walking through airports. Couples sitting inside restaurants unaware they were being photographed. None of them looked posed. None looked professional. Every image felt stolen from ordinary life. Claire stepped slowly deeper into the room while her pulse climbed painfully higher. Then she noticed something that made her stop cold. One photograph near the back wall showed her. Claire herself. Standing outside her Portland studio 6 months earlier. Claire could not stop staring at the photograph of herself. The image had clearly been taken from across the street outside her Portland studio during late afternoon sunlight months earlier. She stood near the front entrance laughing faintly at something Jenna had said, completely unaware someone was watching through a long lens. The realization hollowed her chest instantly. Rain echoed softly against the metal roof above storage unit 4C while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Around her, walls filled with candid photographs seemed to breathe quietly inside the dim industrial space. Ordinary people frozen inside stolen moments. None of them looking toward the camera. None aware they had been documented. Claire stepped backward slowly, gripping the Nikon camera against her chest. I did not think Daniel was dangerous, just secretive. The words escaped before she could stop them, and they terrified her because they were true. Daniel had never screamed, never broken things, never frightened her in obvious ways. His cruelty had always been quieter than that. Precision instead of chaos, distance instead of anger, the ability to make someone doubt themselves while remaining perfectly composed. Claire's pulse pounded painfully now as she turned toward another row of photographs. A young man entering a courthouse. An elderly couple outside a pharmacy. A woman carrying flowers through Pike Place Market. None of it made sense together. What was Daniel doing with these images? Why keep them hidden in a storage unit near the harbor? Her thoughts fractured suddenly when footsteps echoed somewhere outside the hallway. Claire froze instantly. The storage facility had grown quieter as evening settled across Seattle. Most businesses near the waterfront had already closed beneath the cold drizzle and darkening skies. She lowered the metal door halfway instinctively, leaving only a narrow strip of fluorescent light visible beneath it. Then she listened. Another set of footsteps approached slowly. Not hurried. Careful. A woman's voice finally broke the silence from outside the unit. Claire. Claire's stomach tightened immediately. Who is there? For a second, only rain answered through the distant metal corridors. Then the woman stepped partially into view beneath the hallway lights. Blue wool coat. Dark blonde hair pinned loosely above tired eyes. Early 40s maybe. She looked more exhausted than threatening. My name is Megan Ellis, the woman said softly. I am the one who called you. H8.2 arrived quietly but heavily in the damp air between them. Claire stared at her cautiously without lowering the camera from her hands. Megan's expression shifted the second she noticed the Nikon. Something close to dread crossed her face. You really found it, she whispered. Claire's pulse climbed again. You knew where it was? Megan hesitated before stepping carefully inside the unit. The fluorescent lights washed pale across rows of framed photographs surrounding them like silent witnesses. Not exactly, Megan answered. I only knew Daniel would panic if anyone ever got access to those files. Claire folded her arms tightly against herself. What files? Megan looked toward the walls uneasily. The photographs. The records. Everything. Rain hammered harder outside now while thunder rolled faintly over the harbor. Claire watched Megan carefully. Her hands shook slightly as she tucked damp hair behind one ear. She did not look dangerous either. Just deeply unsettled. Who are you to Daniel? Claire finally asked. Megan gave a small humorless laugh. Nobody important. I worked contract insurance investigations a few years ago. Background verification. Property claims. Quiet paperwork nobody notices. She glanced again toward the photographs covering the walls. Daniel hired me privately. Sometimes. Claire frowned immediately. To investigate people? Megan nodded once. At first, yes. Her voice lowered carefully. It did not seem illegal. Wealthy investors do private verification all the time. Financial histories. Identity checks. Real estate disputes. Claire's eyes drifted across the photographs again. And this? Megan remained silent for several seconds too long. H8.3 unfolded slowly now beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights. Megan stared at the Nikon camera in Claire's hands with visible discomfort before stepping backward toward the hallway. The first time I saw that camera, she whispered carefully, Daniel told me it belonged to someone who asked too many questions. Claire felt cold spread instantly through her chest. Someone. Megan nodded faintly. I never met you back then. But I recognized your face from the pictures later. Rainwater dripped steadily from Megan's coat onto the concrete floor. I told myself Daniel was only obsessive, secretive, controlling maybe, but then the files started growing. Claire's voice lowered. Files about what? Megan looked directly at her for the first time. People connected to property disputes. Investors. Hotel staff. Lawyers. She swallowed hard. And eventually you. Silence crashed heavily between them. Claire tightened her grip on the camera. Why would Daniel investigate me? Megan looked away immediately. Because I think you accidentally photographed something he never wanted documented. Claire stopped breathing for a moment. What did I photograph? Megan's expression changed instantly. Fear. Genuine fear this time. She stepped backward toward the hallway again while distant thunder shook faintly through the building. You need to leave this place, she whispered urgently. Now. Before Claire could stop her, Megan turned and disappeared into the dim corridor outside. Claire rushed after her seconds later. But by the time she reached the hallway, Megan Ellis was gone. Claire searched the hallway outside storage unit 4C for nearly 10 minutes, but Megan Ellis had vanished completely. Rain echoed through the industrial district while cold wind pushed mist beneath flickering parking lot lights outside the facility. The waterfront streets looked nearly empty now except for distant delivery trucks and ferries moving through dark water along the harbor. Claire finally returned to the storage unit with shaking hands and locked the metal door halfway behind her. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while rows of stolen photographs stared back at her from every wall. She no longer looked at them as random images now. They were records. Patterns. Pieces of something Daniel had spent years hiding carefully. Claire stepped deeper into the unit again, forcing herself to breathe steadily. Some people hide lies in safes. Daniel hid his in photographs. The realization settled heavily into the silence around her. She moved slowly along the back wall studying frames one by one. Most looked ordinary at first glance. People entering buildings. Meetings in cafes. Hotel lobbies. Parking garages. But once she noticed the timestamps written faintly on the backs of several frames, a pattern began emerging. Dates. Locations. Repeated names. Her stomach tightened again. This was not random surveillance. It was organized. Careful. Intentional. Claire reached toward a large black frame hanging near the corner of the storage unit. The photograph showed an older man leaving a courthouse carrying legal files beneath a gray umbrella. Something about the frame itself looked uneven, slightly crooked against the wall. She removed it carefully. H9.2 unfolded the moment the backing loosened in her hands. A sealed gray envelope slid quietly onto the concrete floor behind the frame. Claire froze immediately. Her pulse hammered inside the silence while rain tapped softly against the metal roof overhead. For several seconds she simply stared at the envelope without touching it. Then slowly she knelt and opened the flap. Inside sat neatly organized documents bundled together with paper clips and handwritten notes. Parking receipts. Printed timestamps. Hotel access logs. Security badge records. Property entry reports. Claire spread the documents carefully across an old folding table beneath the fluorescent lights. Every page connected to names appearing inside the photographs around the room. Lawyers. Property consultants. Hotel employees. Investors. Some records dated back nearly 8 years. Her eyes moved faster now as the scale of it slowly revealed itself. Daniel had not been documenting people randomly. He had been tracking them, quietly building timelines around specific individuals connected to luxury developments, property negotiations, and financial disputes throughout Seattle. None of it appeared violent or openly criminal. That almost made it worse. Everything looked clean on the surface. Professional. Legal enough to avoid attention. Yet deeply invasive beneath the details. Claire recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately across several notes clipped to the files. Short phrases written in dark blue ink. Potential leverage. Met privately. Unreported contact. Financial inconsistency. Her chest tightened painfully. She remembered that handwriting from grocery lists and anniversary cards once. H9.3 settled slowly into the cold storage room as Claire began arranging the documents across the table in chronological order. Receipts. Hotel stays. Parking records. Timestamps from photographs. She worked for nearly 2 hours while rain battered the harbor outside and darkness deepened beyond the narrow windows near the ceiling. The deeper the timeline became, the more disturbing the pattern looked. Daniel appeared connected to multiple hidden meetings between investors, legal consultants, and hotel employees tied to several luxury redevelopment projects around Seattle. But one name appeared repeatedly across nearly every folder. Harborview Suites. Claire leaned back slowly in the folding chair while fluorescent light washed pale across the scattered papers. Harborview was more than a hotel. It was connected to nearly everything inside the storage unit. Every hallway photograph. Every parking receipt. Every access log. Then she noticed one final folder tucked beneath the others. Her name written carefully across the tab. Claire Bennett. Her hands immediately went cold. Inside sat photographs of her studio, her apartment building, coffee shops she visited regularly in Portland. Alongside the photographs rested printed copies of her flight records from years earlier, client invoices, and even personal social media screenshots she barely remembered posting. Claire stopped breathing when she reached the final page. It was a printed contact sheet from the Nikon camera itself. One image had been circled heavily in blue ink. A photograph Claire vaguely remembered taking years earlier during one of Daniel's investor galas in Seattle. At first glance it looked ordinary. Ballroom lighting. Guests drinking champagne beneath chandeliers. But Daniel had marked a specific figure standing near the far edge of the frame. The same maintenance worker from the hallway reflections. Beside him stood a man Claire immediately recognized from local Seattle business magazines. Judge Leonard Voss. Claire stared at the image while dread settled slowly through her chest. Why would a city judge appear secretly in Daniel's hidden files? Before she could think further, footsteps echoed sharply outside the storage unit again. This time they moved faster. Closer. Then someone stopped directly outside Unit 4C. Claire held her breath completely still as a shadow darkened beneath the half-open metal door. Claire stopped breathing as the shadow remained motionless outside storage Unit 4C. Rain hammered against the harbor rooftops while fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her. The scattered documents covering the folding table suddenly looked impossibly exposed beneath the pale industrial lighting. Her pulse pounded so loudly she barely heard the metal door shift upward another few inches. Then a familiar voice spoke softly from outside. Claire. Walter. The receptionist from the front office. Claire exhaled sharply in relief she did not fully trust. Walter stepped cautiously inside the storage unit holding a ring of keys and a paper coffee cup. His tired eyes drifted slowly across the photographs covering the walls before settling on the documents spread across the table. "You should not stay here long," he muttered quietly. Claire folded her arms tightly against herself. "You knew what was inside this place?" Walter shook his head immediately. "Not exactly. People rent storage units for all kinds of strange reasons." He glanced again toward the photographs. "But your ex came here late at night more than once." Claire's stomach tightened. "When was the last time?" Walter hesitated before answering. "About a month ago." That timeline matched the newest photographs inside the camera. Claire looked toward the folders again while cold realization spread slowly through her chest. Daniel had been here recently, organizing files, updating records, maybe even watching her. Walter lowered his voice carefully. "There is something else." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded business card. "Seattle Police Department. Detective Ryan Mercer. Guy came by yesterday asking questions about Harborview Suites." Claire stared at the card without touching it. "Police." Walter nodded once. "Soon as I heard your ex-wife's story, figured maybe it mattered." Claire swallowed hard. Until now, everything still felt uncertain. Disturbing but unclear. Hidden photographs. Strange records. Suspicious meetings. She had not even known whether any of this qualified as an actual crime. H10.1 echoed quietly through her thoughts now. "I was not even sure this was a crime. Until the detective saw his name." 30 minutes later, Claire sat inside her car beneath steady rain, outside the downtown Seattle Police Department. The building rose cold and gray against storm clouds while wet traffic lights reflected across slick pavement below. She stared at the folder stacked carefully beside the Nikon camera in the passenger seat. Her hands would not stop shaking completely. Part of her still wanted to drive back to Portland. Forget all of it. Return to wedding photography and quiet routines, and a life where Daniel existed only as a painful memory. But another part of her already knew she had crossed too far into the truth to look away now. H10.2 unfolded as Claire finally stepped inside the police station carrying the camera bag tightly against her shoulder. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee, damp coats and old paper. Fluorescent lighting reflected harshly across polished tile floors while phones rang somewhere deeper inside the building. Officers moved quietly between desks. Without looking at her twice, ordinary people sat waiting beneath muted television screens displaying weather reports and ferry delays. Claire suddenly felt very small standing there alone with years of hidden evidence pressed against her chest. A tired desk sergeant looked up from behind the front counter. "Can I help you?" Claire hesitated. I think I found something connected to Harborview Suites." The officer's expression barely changed. "What kind of something?" Claire looked down at the camera bag. "Photographs. Records. Surveillance maybe." He motioned toward a nearby waiting area. "Have a seat." Nearly 40 minutes passed before Detective Ryan Mercer finally appeared from a hallway carrying a legal pad and paper coffee cup. Early 40s. Gray wool coat damp from rain. Calm eyes sharpened by exhaustion more than aggression. He introduced himself quietly and led Claire into a small interview room overlooking downtown traffic through rain-covered windows. Claire placed the folders and Nikon camera carefully across the table beneath fluorescent lights. Detective Mercer listened patiently while she explained everything from the returned camera to storage unit 4C. At first, his expression remained professionally neutral. Confused maybe. Skeptical. The story sounded impossible even to her now. Then Claire slid the final folder toward him. The one containing Daniel's handwritten notes and the photograph of Judge Leonard Voss at Harborview Suites. H10.3 arrived silently in the room the moment Detective Mercer saw the name Daniel Harper across the file. His entire posture changed. He stopped turning pages. Stopped writing notes. For several long seconds, he simply stared at the documents while rain streaked slowly down the windows behind him. Then without a word, Mercer stood and walked to the interview room door. Claire watched quietly as he reached out and closed it carefully. The soft click of the lock sounded louder than anything else in the room. 2 weeks passed before Claire saw Daniel Harper again. Seattle drifted into early spring beneath silver skies and cold harbor wind while quiet conversations spread through financial circles downtown. Detective Ryan Mercer never told Claire everything directly, But she understood enough from the sudden subpoenas, closed-door meetings, and late-night calls from investigators. Harborview Suites had become part of something much larger than a hidden storage unit. Private leverage files, confidential surveillance, quiet manipulation surrounding luxury development deals across Seattle. Daniel's name no longer moved comfortably through elite business rooms the way it once had. Yet publicly nothing had happened. No headlines, no arrests, no scandals, just silence. And silence was somehow more unsettling. On the evening of the Blackstone Real Estate Gala, rain shimmered softly across downtown streets while black cars lined the entrance of the Harbor Crown Hotel overlooking Elliott Bay. Crystal chandeliers glowed warmly behind towering glass windows as Seattle's wealthiest investors gathered beneath gold lighting and soft jazz music. Claire stood alone inside the hotel restroom staring at her reflection beneath pale marble lights. She wore a simple black satin dress that fell elegantly without trying too hard. No diamonds, no dramatic entrance. Just quiet composure wrapped carefully around exhaustion. The Nikon camera rested inside her handbag beneath folded copies of several photographs. For a moment she barely recognized herself. 2 weeks earlier she had been hiding inside a storage unit surrounded by evidence of a marriage she never fully understood. Tonight she stood inside the same world Daniel once used to make her feel invisible. But something inside her had changed quietly since then. Fear no longer controlled the room the way it once had. Claire stepped into the ballroom just after 8 o'clock. H11.2 unfolded instantly beneath warm chandelier light and the low hum of expensive conversation. Investors in tailored tuxedos drifted between champagne towers, while waiters crossed polished marble floors carrying silver trays through the crowd. Near the center stage, Daniel Harper stood beneath soft amber spotlights delivering a presentation about a new waterfront redevelopment project. Calm, polished, perfectly composed. The same man who once convinced Claire she was too emotional to survive his world. He wore a charcoal suit with a dark blue tie she remembered buying for him years earlier during their final anniversary trip to Chicago. Claire stopped walking for half a second when she realized that detail. Strange how memories survive even after trust disappears. Around her, guests continued talking softly without noticing her arrival yet. Then Daniel looked up from the stage. H11.1 arrived in a single suspended moment beneath the ballroom lights. The room went quiet the second Daniel saw the camera in my hands. Claire felt it immediately. The shift. Small at first. Daniel's expression faltered almost invisibly as his eyes locked onto the black Nikon camera resting against her side. For the first time since she had known him, genuine uncertainty crossed his face in public. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear carefully hidden beneath composure. His speech slowed slightly before stopping altogether. Several nearby investors turned curiously toward Claire, sensing tension without understanding it. The ballroom music continued softly somewhere in the background while rain streaked down massive windows overlooking the harbor. Claire did not speak. She did not need to. H11.3 unfolded quietly now as she crossed the ballroom floor beneath warm golden light, wearing the simple black dress and carrying the camera Daniel once tried to erase from existence. She walked calmly between tables without rushing, without confronting him, without lowering her eyes. Conversations faded around her one by one as recognition slowly spread through the room. Some guests knew she was Daniel's ex-wife. Others recognized her from old gala photographs years earlier. A few simply noticed the way Daniel stopped speaking entirely the moment she entered. Claire passed beneath the chandeliers feeling strangely detached from the luxury surrounding her. Years ago this world intimidated her deeply. The marble floors. The private investors. The practiced confidence. Daniel built entire relationships by making other people feel small inside rooms like this. But tonight the room itself seemed uncertain. Claire reached the edge of the stage area and stopped, beside a champagne table overlooking the harbor windows. Daniel finally stepped down from the podium, microphone still hanging loosely in one hand. Close, he looked older than she remembered. More tired around the eyes. "Claire," he said quietly. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice now. She studied him calmly without answering immediately. Around them, conversations had nearly disappeared completely. Rain moved in silver lines across the windows behind the ballroom, while distant ferry lights drifted through darkness on Elliott Bay. Daniel glanced once toward the Nikon camera in her hand before lowering his voice further. "You should not have come here." Claire's expression never changed. "You invited half the city," she answered softly. "I assumed you could handle one more guest." Several nearby investors exchanged nervous glances. Daniel forced a smile that never reached his eyes. Then suddenly Claire noticed something unexpected. Across the far side of the ballroom, Detective Ryan Mercer had just entered through a side doorway accompanied by two sharply dressed investigators carrying sealed folders. Rain shimmered against the towering windows of the Harbor Crown Hotel, while silence spread slowly through the ballroom like a crack moving beneath ice. Claire remained standing beside the champagne table with the Nikon camera resting calmly in her hand. Across the room, Detective Ryan Mercer and two investigators moved quietly through the crowd carrying sealed folders beneath their coats. No one raised their voice. No one caused a scene. Yet the atmosphere inside the gala shifted instantly. Daniel Harper noticed it before anyone else. Claire saw the exact moment it happened. The moment confidence left his face and calculation took its place. Investors who had spent the last hour laughing beside him suddenly looked away. Conversations lowered into whispers. Several guests quietly stepped back from Daniel without fully understanding why. H12.2 unfolded softly beneath chandelier light and distant jazz music. News had not officially broken yet, but uncertainty traveled quickly inside wealthy rooms. Detective Mercer stopped near a group of real estate attorneys. Across the ballroom and quietly exchanged documents with one of the investigators. Another guest checked his phone and frowned. Two board members near the bar whispered sharply before leaving their drinks untouched on the counter. Claire watched the chain reaction spread with strange calmness. No confrontation. No dramatic accusations. Just the slow invisible collapse of trust. Daniel remained near the stage attempting to preserve composure, but even from across the ballroom Claire could see tension settling into his posture. For years he had controlled rooms through certainty, through reputation, through making people believe he always stood one step ahead. Tonight that certainty was dissolving quietly beneath soft lighting and expensive suits. H12.1 echoed through Claire's thoughts while she observed the room carefully. No one confronted him. They just slowly stopped standing beside him. The cruelty of social silence felt almost elegant inside spaces like this. Nobody wanted to attach themselves to uncertainty, especially wealthy people with reputations to protect. Claire noticed one investor excuse himself mid-conversation with Daniel after receiving a phone call. Another avoided eye contact entirely while crossing toward the ballroom exit. Even the hotel staff seemed more careful now, moving around Daniel instead of toward him. Rain rolled steadily across the windows behind the city skyline, while ferries drifted through darkness below. Claire should have felt triumphant perhaps. But instead she only felt tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes after carrying confusion for too many years.